Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. I'm going to jump right in today. Today I want to talk about routines. I've talked about routines on this show in relation to certain topics. I've talked about routines relevant to what I call relaxed productivity. I've talked about routines relevant to rejuvenation. But today I want to talk about your overall life routine. Now, in downtime, one thing I do sometimes is I have a pretty good YouTube feed. I think because I've watched a lot of good stuff and I download a lot of good stuff on the YouTube Premium service. So I download a lot of stuff that has to do with human flourishing, personal productivity, and thus I get fed things that are related to that. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. And one thing that I saw recently reminded me that there are a lot of resources on different people's routines. And sometimes you'll see what Elon Musk does in the morning, what Bill Gates does in the morning. And I generally find those at least somewhat interesting and useful. And then I saw Vanity Fair had one, and the format is everything X does in a day. So there was everything Mark Cuban does in a day and everything Michael B. Jordan, I think it is, does in a day. And I think the reason that these exist is because people have a sense that routines are very powerful, and thus they want to know the routines of people they regard as successful. And I certainly agree that routines are very powerful. They're probably even more powerful than people who talk about morning routines realize, because we talk about morning routines, but we don't talk as much about life routines. And what's the point of a morning routine? Well, I think the idea is that you know that if you enact certain causes at the beginning of a day, then you're more likely to get certain effects that you like. So someone will say, I know that if I shower in the morning, then I'm going to feel better and I'm going to be more disciplined, or whatever benefits they attribute to that. And that I don't know the exact effects of that, but I know that in general, there's a pretty powerful cause and effect relationship where there's a positive, productive relationship with me showering versus not showering. And you think about that, and that's pretty powerful, because showering might take 5 minutes, might take 10 minutes, and yet doing it or not affects the rest of the day. One thing that thinking about routines recognizes that's all too easy to not recognize in life is just that cause and effect is so powerful, and it's also incredibly predictable in many ways. It's very predictable, at least on the level of routine. If you spend your time in X way, you'll tend to get certain results versus other results. Lots of things in life are very unpredictable in terms of, will this particular business work? Will this relationship work? Or if I go out on a date with this person, what will that lead to? There are lots of things where life is unpredictable, but in terms of the types of actions that we do in our routines, those have enormous predictive significance because they have enormous cause and effect significance. And thus, I think it's a good thing that people are looking for other people's routines. Now, unfortunately, the way these routines are shared, I often don't find very useful. And in part because some people who have routines, I think they're succeeding in spite of their routines. Their routines just don't seem to make that much sense. And there are a lot of things that can make someone succeed. And maybe they became successful and then maybe they changed their routine. So when I went through those Vanity Fair ones and I didn't find them particularly useful, I'm trying to think of anything I got from them. But occasionally there's somebody who really has an engineered routine, at least a morning routine, but then even better than that is a life routine. Because for the same reasons we want a morning routine, there are going to be regularities in the rest of life where if we spend time in certain ways versus others, life is going to be much better. So I'm always on the lookout for people who have compelling life routines, and then I want to know their routines, and then I also want to know the reasons behind them. And maybe the most useful person I've found in this regard, I don't know if I've mentioned him on the show before, but I'm a big fan of his in many, many ways. His name is Sam Ovens. And he's really, really interesting guy. He runs a company called consulting.com. And what that company does is it basically trains what he calls consultants, but he has a very broad conception of consultant. And you can think of it as he really teaches people how to start small businesses. But I own his program, and I don't have any kind of affiliate thing, although I think he offers it. But I'll just tell you, I think his program is really amazing. And sometime in the future, I'll talk about it. In particular, share with you some of the results I've gotten from it, some of the results people on my team have gotten from it. But this is somebody who who, as much as possible, tries to understand the cause and effect of things on a very precise level. And I think that if you're starting a business, he is somebody who has very, very good advice at a general level, but more importantly, at a very specific level. For example, he has very good insights on how to think about a market, how to validate a market, how to come up with a product. So one thing he's very good at, and he will often have free YouTube videos on this, is productivity. And he pretty recently had one. Let's see, I'm going to pull it up. Oh, it's just called How to Be More Productive. And then it says parentheses, Quantum Mastermind, which I believe is his mastermind group that I'm not a part of, but might be at some point. Anyway, really smart guy. I think his routine is worth listening to because everything in it has a purpose and it's very well engineered. Not that it'll be the right routine for you, but it is very well engineered. And I thought that today I would share with you my current routine, not at all so that you should copy it, but I think I do a good job of thinking through what I should do when, and thinking that through in a way that's true to the idea of this show, which is human flourishing, which is that we want to succeed in an integrated way that integrates both, the material realm and the mental realm, so to speak, and that in general we want the different processes of our life to work well, to integrate well. They all need to fit together in a certain way and meet certain needs. And I think that thinking about a good life routine is incredibly helpful in flourishing. So that's what I want to talk about today, is talking about engineering life routines, and then in particular, my routine. Now, before I get started on that, I just wanted to answer a question. I got an interesting question on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And it was from Jonathan Hersey, who's a good guy and has been a consistent listener and thoughtful listener of this show. And I'll just summarize his question. You can see it on the Facebook page from last week's episode. But he gives me a compliment and describes me as self-aware, and then he asks about basically how do you become self-aware? Did seeing a psychologist help you become self-aware? And I just had one quick thought on that I think might be useful, which is that it's a lot easier to be aware about others than it is to be aware about ourselves. In the realm of writing, this is definitely true. It's a lot easier to be aware of the strengths and weaknesses of somebody else's article than the strengths and weaknesses of our own article. And one thing that really good writers have in common is they have somehow figured out how to look at their work as if they're somebody else. I think that's just an incredible asset in communication. And thus, self-awareness has a lot of inherent difficulties to it because we can't see ourselves from the outside. So one simple tip there is just figure out a way to set up our life so that we are getting feedback from the outside and honest feedback from the outside. And it doesn't need to be a professional necessarily, but it needs to be honest, because even if we can just get the sense that, oh, different people are seeing me this way, and oh, this is how I thought I was acting this way, and they perceive that, you just can get get a lot of information. And then, so the key is just figure out a way to get other people's perspectives on you. That's one. And then two is try to be as non-defensive as possible. And one tip here is that when we get feedback or observations about us, we should not treat it in a binary way, as in either this is totally accurate or total BS. Because often we'll hear something about ourselves and we'll say, well, that's not fair, that's exaggerated, and we're probably right. Often people don't give feedback in a totally objective way, but anything we just want to mine for truth. And there's an analogy with writing. I always think if somebody well-meaning has a criticism of an article of mine or a podcast of mine or anything else, I always think they're right that something is wrong. I don't think they necessarily know what's wrong, and they may not have any clue about how to fix it, and they may not be able to do a better job themselves. But generally, because people have this observer perspective that's very powerful, they're usually right about something. So I'd say when we not only subject ourselves to feedback and observation, but look for the truth in it. Now, seeing a psychologist can be very helpful, unless the psychologist is one of these enabler types who just thinks, they're just trying to validate everything. So you have to watch out for that. But even if you don't have a psychologist, just try to get people's honest feedback in general and then try to mine it for truth. So that's one of those things that's simple, but I think it's pretty underutilized. And I think it's because one reason is because we underestimate how difficult it is to be self-aware and underestimate how easy it is to be aware of others. So if we take advantage of those dynamics, we can be more self-aware. All right, let me talk about my routine, my life routine. And it's my current life routine. So the reason I'm telling you my current routine is not that this exact thing has worked for years and years, but in general, having a routine has worked very well, and the thinking behind it can be useful to you. So, okay, time to jump in. One of the frameworks I use for my life routine is something I got from Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach, and I've mentioned him a couple times. I think he's a very thoughtful guy about a lot of things and thinks a lot in terms of human flourishing, even if he doesn't. He uses that term, I think, now that he and I have talked for a while, but I think he's always thought in this way in a very substantial way. So he has what he calls the entrepreneurial time system. And the basic idea of that system is that you need to, based on an entrepreneur, or really any individual, has a need for fundamentally different types of time and uses of time in their life. So then they should then allocate time in very different ways. So he has what he calls free days, buffer days, and focus days. I think he'll say free days, focus days, and buffer days. So a free day, that's a day when, or I'll start with focus day, actually. That's easier to start with. So focus day is, you can think of it as, it's the equivalent of an athlete who is performing or who's practicing all day. That's the day when you're doing the thing that you're best at, and often that's the thing that in your job makes you the most money. The idea is that those kinds of things benefit from a long period of at least relatively uninterrupted concentration. There are just all sorts of efficiencies that you get from spending time focused on one thing or one kind of thing, and then having very little interruption. And then there's the category of a free day, which is the idea that we benefit a lot when we can take our mind completely off work, or at least have no responsibility to work, even if we think about it in a kind of fun way. But in general, it's good to have a day off, and you see athletes do this. So that's what's called a free day. And he thinks of it a lot in terms of days. So at least scheduling a good number of free days every year. He's pretty well known. I think he schedules something like 140 of them. He and his wife do that. But however many you schedule, I schedule a lot less. But he's in favor of scheduling them. But the key is just that this is a day when you don't have any kind of responsibility work-wise, and then you can really do something that you find rejuvenating or otherwise rewarding. And then the other key kind of day, which is really essential to making the other two work, is what he calls a buffer day. And this is a day where you do everything besides the really focused work and then the non-work. And this is things like planning, doing things that are administratively necessary, maybe things like doctor's appointments, just a whole bunch of different things. They'll vary depending on the person, but bunching those together. So in my current setup, I am very, very weighted toward focus days. So basically I have Saturday is my free day. You'll see I have some free time on just about all the other days, but Saturday is my free day. Friday is my buffer day. So Friday, that's today. I'm recording this on a Friday and often do record it on a Friday. That's the day where I do as much as possible, like planning, and then any kind of administrative thing, so that the rest of the week I'll be able to do focus days. And right now I do focus days Sunday through Thursday. So that's the general division. Now, again, your mileage may vary, but it's important to think of it in terms of, okay, this is how I'm allocating types of time during the day, and at least this free day, focus day, buffer day is one way that a lot of people, including me, have found effective to think about it. All right, so now I want to talk about what happens in a focus day. That's the most interesting one. So then I'll just give you from the time I wake up to the evening. And what's going on here is I'm just trying to think in general what types of activities will make my life go the best when I do them. And for focus days, I want to know, okay, what's going to make me most productive, but in a way that I enjoy it. So when I get up, I actually don't really use an alarm clock, but I'll go to bed at about 10 and wake up at 6 or 6:30. And I generally have the idea, okay, you're getting out of bed by 6:30. I'll occasionally sleep past that, but very, very rarely. And then for that, I don't have an exact order of morning routine, and it may be that I would benefit from, but it'll be some combination of the things I want to definitely hit. The boxes I want to check are showering, meditating, breakfast, and then walking on the beach, usually, or walking somewhere. Usually walking is right before I start work because I tend to work much better if I'm kind of thinking out loud or even thinking walking around before I get to writing, which is the main type of work that I do. So making sure those happen, and then if my girlfriend is over, then I'll have a little bit of time with her. But general, an hour, maximum hour and a half, I'm checking off all those boxes. And I find it's crazy that when I don't hit one of those boxes, the shower, meditate, breakfast, walk on the beach, it has all sorts of negative ripple effects later. So if I don't have breakfast, then I start to get hungry, and then I end up trying to prepare something during a block, and that's a complete mess. If I don't meditate, I notice that later in the day. If I don't shower, there's just this feeling of I'm not really working. And it's a weird thing because I've worked at home a large portion of the time since I've been 21 years old, and I'm now 38. But still, it's really just striking how that makes a difference. And for other people, it won't. So, but the idea is just think about what things, if you check them off, life is going to be a lot better. And then if you don't check them off, life is going to be a lot worse. All right. So from then 7:30 to 8 until 11:30, that is my core productive time. And that is a 4-hour block. And at the moment, I'm using it almost all for the Moral Case for Fossil Fuels 2.0, since that's my biggest productive project. And what I find is that 4 hours is just about the perfect amount of time. I can get a lot done even in an hour, but so much of, particularly with writing, there are just so many benefits of building up a context. And I find that, or at least at the moment, I'm actually editing something. So I find that with that 4 hours is really good to get my mind warmed up, to get it all in my head, to do a lot of hard mental work. And then by the end of that, I should start getting a little bit fatigued. And that's then showing me, okay, I have diminishing returns. Now, again, this is very focused on me. So you might have a totally different situation, but I would just think about when in the day are you most productive and in what way, and make sure to engineer your life around that. So in the morning, I can be productive in the afternoon in certain ways, but that time in the morning is just that you can take that to the bank. If I set up my life in the right way, I can get a lot done. Now, with people starting out as writers, there are all kinds of blocks that people have. So you might need to do totally different things. For me, at this stage, I don't have much trouble at all getting motivated to write. I usually really want to, and I find the process enjoyable enough that I find it's hard, but I find it rewarding throughout. Some people, they might just have to commit to 15 minutes, and then if they can do more, that's great. But whatever, for me, this is an instance of engineer the day so that I can do my best work when I can do my best work. So then Then we hit 11:30/noon, and that is where sometime during those 4 hours, I'll take at least one rejuvenation break, but I don't schedule it because it's very unpredictable, just where I'll be in the writing process. So I don't want to over-engineer it. Then I'll take a little bit of a break, but then by 12, I want to make sure that I'm doing sales and administrative stuff because that needs to be done. And I find that most of that work, that requires thinking, but I can be a little bit tired when I do that thinking. I generally don't like being very tired when I work, but it's a good way to fit that in, and that's a good amount of time. And in part, I have some really good colleagues who help me with that. So I have like a phone call at 12:30 with my colleague Don Watkins, and I find that, in that little amount of time, I'm very good at giving feedback. It's a lot easier for me to give feedback than for me to create new writing or to really create new thinking. So that's just engineered so that, okay, every day, at least on the on my focus days where I really want to focus on creating new things, I am at least keeping up on those other things, but it's not swamping me. So then we get to 1 o'clock, and then this is a really key time of day because this is afternoon rejuvenation, and it's become very unfashionable to take long lunch breaks. And I definitely take a long lunch break. And a good book that talks about some of the benefits of this is the book, what is it? I think it's called When by Dan Pink. And he talks a lot about the benefits of taking breaks in the afternoon and different rhythms. And what I found is around 1, if I stop work even at 12, it doesn't work that well because I don't rejuvenate very well at 12. It's just crazy how specific these things are. But I find 1, that's really the time when I start to get fatigued, and then I'm ready for total rejuvenation. And the best combination, if I can get it, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I just go half an hour. I just go to the half an hour sparring session at my local school, which is not ideal for learning Jiu-Jitsu, but my goal in life is not to be as good at Jiu-Jitsu as I can. I want to get better. My goal is to be as good at my overall life as I can, and I'm more focused on my productive work than on becoming the best Jiu-Jitsu player. So that half an hour a day is just really, that's a perfect amount. It doesn't get me too tired, but it clears my head. It's fun. It's challenging. Then these are some modifications I've made this week, but found them really helpful so far. But again, this is all about not you are going to do this, but just think about it in this way. I found, on the ride home, one thing I've started to do is meditate, at least for 10 minutes, just do an early afternoon one. Because I just find that very rejuvenating, even if I only do it for 10 minutes. And then when I get back, go into the ocean. And what I found over time is that I always feel good going into the ocean, but particularly if I go into the ocean for at least 10 minutes, it's a profoundly different experience than if I just go in for a few minutes. So I just say, okay, I'm going to go in for at least 10 minutes. And once I go in there for at least 10 minutes, and I've already done jiu-jitsu, I've already meditated, my head is really clear and I can start to think about what I'm going to do in the afternoon. So then 2:30, I have another focus block, this time 2 hours, and I have I usually will have a lot of energy for that. So I have that 2 hours at the moment. It's on a secret project. Hopefully I'll get to talk about that soon. Then at 4:30 most days, I have a call with my friend Jesse. We have a 15-minute call, and I just find that's really, really valuable in a lot of different ways in terms of reflection, in terms of connection, particularly because he lives across the country now. And then 15 minutes after that, I do more rejuvenation. And then from 5 to 6:30, that's daily buffer time. So if I feel like I have a little more work to do on my book, or I have a little more work to do on secret project, or I need to do a little bit more work on sales, I like having that hour and a half of time. And then 6:30, that should be my evening time. So whatever free time I want to do, if I want to spend time with my girlfriend or anything else, that is then. And that's kind of rejuvenation. Not much to say about that for these purposes. But the key is that I've engineered the day so that I had really 6 hours to do deep work, and that's a lot of deep work if you can do it. But then I've given myself the room and the buffer to do, to make sure that all loose ends are handled. And then on Friday, I'm doing more buffer stuff, more planning, more sales, more administration. Definitely not my favorite day, but I like to do as much as I can on Friday. So I feel like, okay, now you just have, for this week, you basically just have to be a machine who writes and works on your other projects and then does a little bit of sort of maintenance every day. But beyond that, you can just be the type of machine you like to be. So the question for you to think about is, what type of machine do you like to be? How can you engineer your day? And I'd love to know in email or in Facebook comments at facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. How do you engineer your day, or what new ideas do you have about how to engineer your life routine based on this episode? All right, that is it for this week. If you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, you can email me at alex@alexepstein.com, or better yet, post on the Facebook group, facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And to get weekly notifications about new episodes, go to humanflourishingproject.com. All right, I will speak to everyone next week. Until then, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been the Human Flourishing Project.